as a psychologist, what are some of your non-negotiables in terms of, they can be anything. Again, I know this is a subjective thing, but just certain things that you do and you would not hesitate to recommend this to your patients or people that you come in contact with in terms of, let's say, self-talk or like a daily habit or practice or just something that has served you very well in being a better version of yourself.
I think you mentioned self-talk, and that is definitely important. It has, in my own mental health journey, it has been
the biggest thing. Right?
Yeah. So I think self-talk is definitely something that you need to work on. And it's very easy to say that because it's so ingrained in us कि नहीं, full marks आने चाहिए. 2 marks कम आए तो कैसे? Something I'm not studying enough. I'm too distracted. I'm too on my phone. But to really learn that, hey, I tried my best. And even if it's not your best eventually, I did my best with
the resources I had at that moment. Hi Mayura.
Hi.
Thank you so much for being on our podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
Let's dive right into it. And I want to begin by asking you a little bit about your degree, your qualifications, and your journey to getting where you are today.
So psychology has been a huge part of my life. So I've been studying it for 8 years and more. And so since I was in 8th, 9th grade, I really wanted to study this. I've always been this keen observer of how people act, how people think, and been intrigued by that. And as I started to learn it in 11th grade and 12th grade, I really connected with it. So I did my bachelor's in psychology, and then I did my master's in clinical psychology, and then I did my diploma in expressive arts therapy, and I'm working now.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you said something that caught my attention, which was that you have been intrigued by psychology since you were in 8th grade.
Yeah.
That's a very young age to know what you want to do.
Yeah.
And I know that I didn't know, and I know a lot of people who, did not know for a very long time. So how did that happen? Was there some kind of a defining point that you realized, okay, this is, something that intrigues me, or what?
I don't think there was a clear defining point. I've always been this person who observes and notices the minute things in people's behaviors, in experiences, in the way they talk. So I think it just very organically flowed.
It was something like sort of was meant to happen.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So you said, so are you practicing now? Are you a practicing psychologist now?
Yes.
So give me a lowdown on what your day looks like as a psychologist, and then we'll sort of delve deeper into what a session looks like, maybe, if you're...
Sure, yeah. So I work with adults and children. I work as a psychologist and expressive arts therapy practitioner. So I use psychotherapy in work, and I use theories and techniques of expressive arts therapy. So I work with clients, adult and children both. I do have an offline space that I'm in the process of beautifying and making it more homely. And I also work online. So my day looks like sessions, and sometimes I design workshops with my team members. And yeah, it's basically sessions, workshop designs, collaborations. I work with a community of mental health professionals and expressive art therapy practitioners.
You mentioned expressive art therapy a couple of times, and I know that we have interviewed, other guests who are, practitioners in the same field. I do want to come to that, but before I do, I want to ask you that what are some of the basic differences between, this is for people who are laymen, including me, that what is the difference between psychology and, let's say, clinical psychology and psychiatry? Like, how do we sort of differentiate the three fields and just, a little bit about that.
So all three of them deal with mental health and mental ill health. Psychiatry is a medical profession, so they work with diagnosis, they work with medicines, and the more neurobiological aspects of people's experiences of diagnosis. A clinical psychologist does not they do diagnose, but they don't prescribe medicines. So their way of managing people's experiences is through psychotherapy, through evidence-based interventions. But they also have a neurobiological view.
Okay.
To diagnosis, to assessment, to treatment.
Sure.
And psychologists are people who have trained in theories of psychology, in assessments, and in human theories of human nature. A clinical psychologist is one step above a psychologist, where they are trained in theories of psychology and human nature, but they are trained to diagnose and treat as well. Yeah.
Okay. And then psychiatrists are
they prescribe medications.
okay.
They are not trained to provide psychotherapy. They can do additional
If they want to.
Yes.
Okay. All right. That is, just to make it clear as to what the difference is. So now I want to know that, you spoke a lot about expressive arts therapy. Can you delve a little bit deeper into that and explain to me what that looks like for you and your patients?
For me, it has been a life-changing experience to be part of the expressive arts community, to be even exposed and opened to this field. So it involves dance movement therapy, it involves drama therapy, art therapy, music therapy. There are elements of play therapy in it. And expressive arts therapy can feel so light when you're doing it, but then it can have such an impactful experience once you really delve deep into what you're actually feeling when you are experiencing that. So for me, it has been a journey of really getting in touch with my body and attuning to it even more as a person, as a professional, as in all the different roles I play as a human being, as a sister, as a friend. So for me, it's just been a constant process of unlearning, relearning, and attuning to my own experiences of my own experiences of mental health, my own experiences of trauma, my own bodily, what's sitting in my own body.
Wow.
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah, you were asking about my clients.
Yes.
It can be difficult in the beginning to really. So in India, the field of mental health is still very
Stigmatized.
young.
Yes.
So and for most people who are even aware about it, and who talk about it, for them it can still look like a talking therapy. So to delve into art can be even more difficult. And also because it's so powerful and you know that it's powerful, so you take a pause, you're a little hesitant before going into it. So but then once people start opening themselves up to the abstraction, and there's a lot of vagueness in art.
Yes.
And when I say art, I mean not just visual art. I mean dance and drama.
Correct.
Everything. So it opens up so many different avenues of very abstract experience. It's very visceral, you'd say.
What you said is very interesting, because I want to talk to you as somebody who knows a little bit about mental health, because of my own struggles with it, and also I was somebody like you, that I was very, very intrigued by psychology and I wanted to study it, but life had other plans. But even as I sit here listening to you, I am somebody who has been doing CBT for a very long time, cognitive behavioral therapy for almost 3, 4, 5 years now, maybe longer actually, on and off, but I've been pretty consistent for a very long time. And as I sit here listening to you, expressive arts therapy is something that's very foreign to me. Even though I'm an actor, it is something that makes me uncomfortable to think about, because I know that it will. You're right that it's so visceral and it's so I would say it's uncomfortable, because it will right from the get-go tap into something that you may not be ready to access. Right, and that is not a bad thing. And I want to focus here on one word that you used. You said unlearning, and I think I want you to talk a little bit more about that. That as people, we are so when we are younger, we are told what to do. We are, given a certain set of tools to lead our lives in the perfect way or in an ideal way. These templates of boxes, right? And they look different for different people, but it is how we lead our lives, to some semblance of what society would find acceptable. So talk to me a little bit about why unlearning is such an important part of therapy or expressive arts therapy, or just even general, psychology.
Unlearning.
Or what does it look like, maybe, tell me some of the beliefs that you found very hardwired into your clients. Maybe it could look something like that as well.
Yeah, so one primary thing that a lot of clients come in with is, I have a problem, and sometimes they do have problems in the way they experience the distress that they feel because of their lived experiences. But then to reframe that and unlearning that aspect of framing it as a problem. My belief is that whatever symptoms that we develop, whatever responses that we have to events that happen in our lives, are the best we can do with the resources that we've had, with the upbringing that we've had, our environment, all throughout our life. So to name them as symptoms and to name them as problems is really disregarding all of the context that is there behind that. How a person would react to, a speeding car, for example, would be very different if they've had experiences with accidents, for example. So to frame that as a problem, to frame that as not a problem, is how you slowly start unlearning how you narrate your own life. We all have narratives about our lives, and to slowly unlearn little aspects of that and reframe it, retie it up in little ways.
This makes me I have so many questions, but two pop up immediately. The first one being that, on the basis of what you just said to me, that we are very quick to label ourselves. We are very quick to, sort of use the word problem or symptoms. And I think nobody is doing it to sort of penalize us, but it's just our conditioning. It's how we are conditioned as a society. So I want to ask you that, do you think this is a problem with traditional psychology also, wherein, a lot of, technicians or practitioners tend to sort of have a very put you in a box, label you, so that they can diagnose you and help you approach to psychology? If yes, then how would you do it differently?
Of course, the traditional model of psychology, I'm mainly speaking about the Indian mental health field. There is this people can be very quick to diagnose, either themselves or as clinicians diagnosing someone else. There are systems that we are part of that are usually not taken into place. So one of the main factors, one of the main things that we learn in psychology is to look at a person in a biopsychosocial manner, to look at their biological influences, psychological influences, social influences. And the more you learn about psychology, you keep on adding more to that. But when you diagnose it in the way that people are currently being diagnosed, it can be reductionist, in a way that it puts people into boxes and tells them ki this is you, that's it. There's no change, there's no past, no present, no present, no future.
It can make people feel like that, like it can make people feel very isolated, or as if there's no hope, rather.
There's no hope. Yeah, absolutely. And what diagnosis can have the potential to do is tell people that, hey, this is a cluster of symptoms that have been researched extensively on different kinds of populations, and a lot of people have experienced this. There are lived experiences documenting this. There's research documenting this, and there's established protocols in place to manage this, to treat this, to live with this with hope and dignity. So I feel that diagnosis should be, when giving out diagnosis, it should be more focused on the hope aspect than the box.
That makes a lot of sense, actually, and from what I could hear from what you're saying, it's about sort of humanizing the the experience of the diagnosis and life after diagnosis, right?
Absolutely.
Even if it's something not life altering.
And diagnosis can change also. They can shift. People's experiences can shift in a lot of different ways.
Okay, so that brings me to the fact that, do you think that we can do a role play, so to speak, wherein I sort of tell you some hypothetical symptoms and we, how you would do it differently as opposed to a traditional diagnosis, right?
Of course, yeah.
Okay, so let's say that I'm somebody who's visiting you for the first time. Obviously, putting the initial awkwardness or the initial sort of discomfort aside, let's say I'm somebody who's done this before, and I tell you that, okay, doctor, I've been having a lot of trouble sleeping, and it's been almost like a month. I don't remember what time I sleep. I never sleep before 4 or 5 a.m. in the morning. I tend to wake up. When I wake up, now here's a very big problem. There's a sense of guilt and shame because we've been sort of told that, early risers, people who are the most successful, wake up at 5 a.m. or 4 a.m. or 6 a.m. So there's a lot of shame and guilt. So first you work through that. When you have worked through that, then you somewhat gather the courage to get out of bed. Then there are these spells of sort of anxiety through the day, racing thoughts. Then by the time it's 3 or 4 o'clock, I feel complete exhaustion. How would you sort of deal with this case? And let's say there has been a history of depressive episodes and all that.
So usually how it's done is people look at depression and there's a checklist. Oh, you feel a constant
what is that
sense.
checklist actually? Just to sort of segregate.
I think 3 or 4 main things that point to that, and there are additional symptoms that can add to that diagnosis. So a persevering sense of low mood, of hopelessness, feeling worthless, there's low energy, decreased excitement, decreased passion for life. That's how I put it. So that's, you keep checking these symptoms, and I said the additional symptoms that add to that are sleep issues and eating issues with eating and sleep and daily functioning, essentially. That's how most people go about it, get this.
Right.
But something that I would also look into is your relationship with how you live your day out. And you there's a mention of shame and guilt and anxiety and exhaustion, and it's so overwhelming, those 4 things.
The big emotions.
And I talked about systems, right, that get overlooked. So we live in a system of capitalism, and the capitalistic society thrives on making you feel guilty and ashamed that you cannot function like a normal person would. So to really explore not yours, but
Sure.
the hypothetical person's relationship with capitalism and patriarchy and these systems that are in place that make you feel like if you're not following these set of rules,
Then
and if you don't have a linear trajectory to life, you know, you're done
Give
for.
over,
Yeah. So exploring that.
So you said that, so it is a very different approach, I've never heard of something like this, can we delve deeper into, you use the word capitalism and you use the word patriarchy. When you talk about these things, what are some of the questions that you would ask if when delving into these topics?
It's a very slow process, because these systems are so
Sure.
huge and they're so imbibed into us throughout our lives, throughout generations. It's very difficult to really reach that point to realize this
is the root problem.
Yeah. So a lot of times you spend so much time blaming yourself, and you spend so much time saying ki no yaar, I'm the problem. Going to that route takes practice in unlearning your narrative and building it back up in a more compassionate way, compassionate to yourselves.
Also, it might look different for different people, right?
Yeah,
like
very different.
I don't know so much about capitalism because again, like I haven't explored that aspect, but let's say patriarchy might show up very differently for different people. You know, some people have observed it in their homes, some people have observed this in their workplace, right? So very different ways that these things show up in your life.
And it motivates you.
I haven't explored that aspect, but let's say patriarchy might show up very differently for different people. You know, some people have observed it in their homes, some people have observed this in their workplace, right? So very different ways that these things show up in your life.
And it motivates you in so many different ways. A lot of women take up hyper independence as a response to that. Some women take it up so much that they're essentially unable to ask for help.
Or accept it. I've been there many times in my life, and it took me a long time to realize that hyper independence is a trauma response. We spoke about this in a previous podcast as well. And it is a trauma response to sort of, like for me, I'll talk about something personally. This is very subjective, I know, but on social media, you'll see there is a lot of information, right? So much of it is, what do you accept as true? What actually has a scientific basis to it? We don't know, right? We're just consuming it endlessly. So there's a lot of talk of how men should always pay on a date, and then there's this group of women who are saying that, you deserve to be treated like a queen and all of that. Now, I personally do not know where I fall on this spectrum. Like, I genuinely I don't know what my opinion is because I'm so confused, right? So there is this one that says that there has to be equality in, let's say a relationship where both men and women are paying. Or some are saying that, it's always the man who has to pay because the woman has added so much value to his life by, the way that she looks, the way that she treats him, the way that she's built her life, whatever, or the service that she would, like, I don't know, very non-tangible things, I guess.
There's a lot of mention of emotional labor.
Labor, my God. That is, I think that's a very wide aspect, which I will sort of ask you next. But for me, I don't know where I stand on it because now tomorrow, if I were to, let's say, go on a date, I would have a really tough time with the person sort of paying my half of it, and I know that comes from a sense of hyper independence.
It does,
because there is this sense of shame and guilt as to why the other person should be paying, right? Like I earn money,
I can take care of myself.
I can take care of myself, and I want to take care of myself, and I want to take care of you also eventually, which becomes another completely different topic when it comes to feminism and pseudo feminism, and I don't know, all of these things, that why should you're not in your feminine energy. I don't know, we are digressing, but my point is that how do you sort of make your decisions as to what is actually a hyper independence response and what is the right response when you're flooded with so much information. How do you not diagnose yourself as hyper independent, or how do you sort of decide what is right and what isn't?
I think right and wrong are such black and white concepts, and what is helpful for one person might not be helpful for another. But one thing that a lot of people struggle with is attuning with their selves. My main mantra, I don't know how to put it, but is just follow your gut, because your intuition knows what you want.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And if your intuition says that, oh, this at this point of time, with this person that I am today, this feels right for me.
Sure.
So
That's right.
yeah.
I am a strong believer of the fact that your intuition is sort of sort of your highest self speaking to you, or some kind of energy, whatever people like to call it.
It's your body
telling you.
Yeah.
Right? Now, this is one question that I really like to ask, and I feel like it's something that I still haven't found the answer to. That when you ask, all of us are people who have had some kind of trauma in our lives, right? Emotional, otherwise, physical, whatever, mostly emotional, right? A lot of people go through a lot of things, and we don't really know that it is, trauma, but it defines our beliefs.
Yeah.
How do you differentiate between a gut feeling or something that that is coming out of fear? Because I often, there was a time in my life where I was so emotionally dysregulated that I did not know whether what was coming from within me was a trauma response, in terms of whether it was the worst case scenario fear thought, or was it my gut feeling. How do you differentiate between it? What does that look like? I know this is a bit not as easy to explain, I guess.
It's very subjective.
Sure.
I think, again, it takes practice, slowly tapping into how your body usually responds
versus how it's feeling in that moment.
Yeah. Some people, when they're anxious, they have body sensations of sweating, excessive sweating, and this stomach ache.
Interesting.
And I don't know.
Increased heartbeat is something that I experience. I know. Racing thoughts all of a sudden, your mind not being able to find sort of stability.
Yeah. I'm giving my experience, but with anxiety, I feel a lot of idhar, udhar. But when my gut is telling me, even if I'm trying to go to the udhar, I know that in the end I'm going to end up in the idhar.
Sure.
So I feel sure. But I know that has taken quite a lot of
practice.
Yeah.
It does take practice.
And I know that I'm also privileged to be in part of a community that knows how important
and exercises the self-awareness day in, day out.
Yes.
Which brings me to my next question, which is that as a psychologist, what are some of your non-negotiables in terms of, they can be anything. Again, I know this is a subjective thing, but just certain things that you do and you would not hesitate to recommend this to your patients or people that you come in contact with, in terms of, let's say, self-talk, or like a daily habit or practice, or just something that has served you very well in being a better version of yourself.
I think you mentioned self-talk, and that is definitely important. It has, in my own mental health journey, it has been
the biggest thing. Right?
Yeah. So if I worked on how I talk to myself in one session, 4 years later, I'm realizing this has been so impactful that it has changed how I see my life in these whole 4 years. Sure. So many years later, I'm realizing. So I think self-talk is definitely something that you need to work on. And it's very easy to say that because it's so ingrained in us कि नहीं, full marks आने चाहिए. 2 marks कम आए तो कैसे? Something, I'm not studying enough. I'm too distracted. I'm too on my phone. But to really learn that, hey, I tried my best, and even if it's not your best eventually, I did my best with
the resources I had at that moment.
Yeah.
I do think this is very hard though, this thing that
so
you
hard.
say. I read it in a book just recently, and I've read it before also. This author called Louise Hay, she was a spiritual leader and spiritual author and a metaphysical teacher. And she said this, that at any given moment, we are always doing the best that we can with the resources that we have in that moment. And those resources, you said, are your upbringing, your conditionings, your values, how you're responding to your environment, your traumas, and many other things, right?
Yeah.
Even how you slept the previous night affects your behavior the next day or in any given moment,
And how you feel in your body.
How you're feeling in your body. I do think that how you feel in your body is something is very easy to misdiagnose or to just sort of not understand it, because a lot of us are not equipped with the tools to do that. So again, that will bring me to my next question, that how do you sort of look for some symptoms in your body when you are dysregulated? Let's say you have an anxiety attack or a panic attack or just some sort of discomfort. What are some of the first signs to look for? That's the first part. And the second part is that what are some things that we can do to soothe our nervous system when it is dysregulated?
Yeah. So noticing in the moment when you're having a panic attack can be difficult. But remembering to check in with yourself time and again. So that there are some things that happen along with your panic attack. Some people can have racing thoughts, like we talked about. Some people can have numbness in their fingers. So, there are some signs that already do take place. Noticing as they begin, and also when you're not having a panic attack, right? Noticing how you are then, how you are when you're not dysregulated in the moment. How does your body feel? How does your core feel? The checking in with different parts of your body when you're not having a panic attack. I think that's very important, because we talk so much about dysregulation that we forget to really understand that having an embodied understanding of our own regulated selves is also just as important as understanding कि जो नहीं होना है is important, but जो होना है, that is just as important to have that embodied awareness, right? Is how you'll really get into it cognitively if you go about it. Key listing these things. See, I have numbness, I have racing heart, my heart's racing and all. It's such a cognitive. But knowing in a body,
how am I feeling it?
How does it feel when my heart is not racing, and to be able to
come back to that state. So can you talk me through maybe some techniques that would help regulate your body or bring you back to your status quo or your natural state of being when you are not going through when you are going through a panic attack or an anxiety attack, or just some kind of trauma you're feeling and it's manifesting physically? Can you talk? Can you, like, let's say there's a layman who's coming to you and asking you, what can I do to make myself feel better? Simply put,
I think first you have to notice what is triggering you in that moment, and as much as you can try to step away from that. And I know that's very difficult.
How do you mean step away? What do you mean when you say step away? What does that look like?
If there is if loud noises overwhelm you, for example, stepping into a space where you're not able to hear that, or listening to music. I think music is an incredible way to regulate. And you can really tap into what pace of music, what tone, what kinds of music that you can use to regulate, and to build that repertoire of your I have some sensory things that I have, like leaves or flowers. Then I have some arts based aspects, so I can just scribble on a paper. I can just take something
You
and
figure
just
these
scribble.
things out for yourself.
Yeah,
But these
yeah.
are general tools that you can use.
Yeah.
And so everything may not work for everyone, but
No, that's a
some
very personalized
thing. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. But there are some tools. Anything
Yeah.
else?
There's sensory arts based mindfulness works for some people. So
But again, I think that's a more advanced tool.
Absolutely.
Mindfulness.
Yeah.
And as somebody who practices meditation regularly, mindfulness is hard for me also when I'm having
It is.
some kind of an, like a trauma response, or I'm triggered by
Yeah.
something. Especially lately when I'm, let's say, just anything that happens, it becomes very hard to bring your thing in the present moment. So what I do is I go for a walk. That really helps in being, close to the ocean, sitting and looking at a certain point at the ocean. Being in touch with, I think grounding, it grounds you.
Absolutely.
Very
I
simple
think
things.
nature, elements of nature are,
It's very grounding.
yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of people that I work with, when I ask them ki what soothes you, they list down elements of nature, different parts
Sure.
of maybe some people talk about the ocean like you did. Some people talk about how they have these plants that are growing in their house that are so important. Even drinking water or having food in that moment is still a nature based
Oh,
you know,
wow. That's so simple actually. I
Yeah.
wouldn't think of that I've never done that actually when I'm in the middle of, experiencing some kind of a discomfort. I've never thought of just drinking water and making myself, or that the fact that it can make me feel better. That's so incredible. Wow. Okay, that's amazing. Um, so we spoke about self-talk, and that sort of makes me want to expand into self-image. I feel like when we are struggling with aspects of our mental health, one of the first things that gets impacted or goes for a toss is our self-image.
Yeah.
It completely goes out of the window, and it really can take a lot to build back if you are somebody who has grown up with low self-esteem.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Can you talk to me about some ways that one can build their self-image, even if they are, let's say, they are not experiencing any trauma or any kind of thing related to mental health, and let's say if they are also, what are some basics that they can focus on to have good self-image?
I think community is a very, very important thing. And as much as we focus on therapy, we really don't give our support systems enough credit. Therapy alone is really cannot go that far if you don't have systems outside of therapy to
Sort of uphold what you are,
yeah.
all the work that you're doing in therapy.
Yes.
Definitely.
To have people around you that keep on reiterating ki these are your strengths, even though you have weaknesses, these are your strengths and they are still there
For you.
Yeah.
That sort of strikes a chord with me, and I know it strikes a chord with a lot of people. That a lot of the time our caregivers aren't equipped
Yeah.
to help us. It's not their fault. It's just, I think, conditioning. Their parents never taught them how to. They never felt the need to. They didn't know how to. So our caregivers do not know how to help us feel better. Oftentimes, they end up doing more harm than good when they are trying to help you. They think they're helping you, but it's not really working. So that brings me to the fact that what are some things that a caregiver, again, this is very subjective, I understand, but what are certain things that a caregiver can keep in mind, when dealing with somebody who has experienced any kind of emotional trauma?
I think the main thing to remember that a child is doing their best. They might not know better than you.
But even adults,
they might,
right? Not just children.
I meant your child.
Whoever, whatever
Yeah.
age they may be.
Yeah. The person that you are
Yeah.
caring for
Yeah.
is doing their best, whatever their circumstances are, and to go in with compassion. there might be resentment and anger that you're feeling, and frustration and hopelessness, and it might be valid given the place that you are coming in from. Um, but
That
also
needs
thinking
to take
about,
a backseat, right? When you're a caregiver,
yeah, of
or in
course,
certain circumstances.
so as a caregiver, you do need to work on your own responses to dysregulation and distress. That is for sure. But I think that's still a step further. But in the moment, just realizing that what will help them and what will not help them in the moment. Will yelling work? Will shaming work? Will guilting work? Or will compassion?
I think in the Indian, conventional Indian household, the three things you said that shouldn't be done, which are guilting, shaming, or yelling, are the first three lines of defense um, when they see that a person is struggling. And again, it's not their fault, because I feel that they are not equipped. And I also think that we as a society don't reiterate enough how important the role of the caregiver is in recovery, or just sort of having a semblance of a normal life, you know, or just having a good life. What is normal anyway? But just having a good quality of life. I don't think caregivers understand what an impact they can have, positively or negatively, on the person who's struggling. That brings me to another very important aspect, which is that you spoke about, you know, offline, you spoke about the fact that you worked with survivors of domestic abuse, or just people, you know, in households who are experiencing domestic abuse. And you specified that you work not only with the victims, but also their children.
Yes.
What did that's so profound, you know, what did that look like?
A very powerful experience. I really, I've used this word a lot, but unlearning. And I really unlearned what I thought their experiences would look like. Whatever they have experienced, and how they take it in stride. It was so, they're striving to keep on re-establishing hope in their life was one of the most one of the most impactful things for me, because I went in with a very set beliefs in mind ki, oh, I'm going to do sessions with them and these are my goals for those sessions. But then when I went there, I realized that maybe they don't need me, you know. Their language and how they talked about their narratives was so strength based.
Okay.
There were moments, obviously, where they where it slipped, you know, where they did fall back into their conditioning. But that strength based language, you know, today I'm going to do this, and aage jaake we worked a lot with narratives. And there was one time we worked with stories and how they are the main character in the story they're going to be writing. And their view of the future, their view of themselves in the future was so full of hope and so full of, I'm really not finding the word. They kept on going.
Perseverance, I guess.
Yeah, I think
Resilience.
I didn't want to use the word resilience and perseverance. They can be a little bit
labeling.
Yeah. But yes.
Essentially.
Yeah. With the children.
Yeah, I understand what you mean though. Yeah, I get what you mean, that it can seem like you have to put up with it, or which is not the case.
Yeah.
I understand. Okay, with the children?
With the children you could, and
sorry, just to segregate that, right now we spoke about the victims.
Yes.
The adults.
The adults,
What
yes.
they sort of, how their language is and what your experience was with them. Now we come to the children of the victims.
Yeah. So I'm kind of connecting the adults and the children.
Sure.
The ability of the adults to be compassionate with their children was very powerful. Given the dehumanizing experiences that they've been through, and the very powerfully traumatic experiences that they've been through, them standing up and saying ki, I want my child to grow up and feel hopeful about their life. It's a very small thing, but for them to say that this is an important thing for that child to feel, that hope is important, that was something that I really took back from that experience. As a caregiver, your relationship with your child is so important, especially in that setup, because that caregiver was essentially the only thing that the child had. And their ability to be compassionate with who they are caregivers to was really, really,
and to shield them sort of from the abuse that is going on that they are experiencing, and allow and making sure that that doesn't come on to the child. And can I ask, what was the age of these children?
They range from 1 year to 7 years, some of them.
Wow. So a 7-year-old child is obviously a little bit older and does have some semblance of understanding as to, if they are aware of what's going on. But a 1-year-old child doesn't necessarily have the cognitive understanding of what's happening. But would you say that there is an emotional repercussion of domestic abuse in that 1-year-old child who has witnessed it?
I think there is a potentiality for that, and a higher potentiality for that. But again, it can really be affected with how the caregiver who is present in the moment works with that child.
What would that look like in an ideal scenario? I know again it's very subjective.
I think emotional needs that are fulfilled. There's in that space, they do form a community with each other, taking care of their children and each other's children. But when the primary caregiver is receptive and giving to their emotional needs most of the time, not 100% of the time, but most of the time, I think that can have a very impactful experience. Things like, when they're crying, they just sit down and stroke their back, for example. Instead of yelling at them, stop yelling. Yeah, something as simple as that. Don't yell. Instead of yelling at them because they're in distress, meeting them with compassion. I think in these little moments,
what do you think a caregiver's dialogue or actions can look like when they know that their child is witness to what's happening at home?
And when you're in your teenage, your scripts of how the world functions start to
Form.
Firstly, to reassure them that this is not how the world should work. This is not. There are different ways that the world can function, and you can bring that in. You don't have to keep repeating this cycle. That is one of the main things to keep reiterating. This is not the
norm.
This is not the norm. And there are so many different possibilities where compassion is at the head of the ship.
Yeah, correct. I think that is sort of the groundwork that you have to lay no matter what the situation is, and especially in a situation like this, right? A lot of the times when the child is a little older, it can be internalized also. It's very easy to internalize it. Maybe I'm responsible for something like this,
The main thing to do there is just to sit down and have a very honest conversation about this. Because some people might shy away from it, saying ki bacha hai.
But
He might not.
intelligent than they give them
Absolutely.
credit for, right?
And to have that serious conversation with them, and in that conversation treating them as equals. Ki, what you are thinking based on your experience is completely valid, but hey, here's an alternative approach. What do you think about this?
Wow, that's so interesting. Do you want to add more to this particular topic of domestic violence in homes and just impact of caregivers on children and just anything else regarding this?
I think so. I worked with the arts when I worked with these populations, and it can be so powerful. I just want to. I don't know how to tell you because it's such an abstract thing. But with the children, for example, most of the times we did nothing but play. For most of the sessions, we sang with them, we danced with them, we played with their toys, we brought in we made little shakers out of rice. And just that 1 hour in one whole week where they engaged with the arts without any expectations. It wasn't a class. It wasn't a learning environment. It was where you just played for an hour. We saw so much response in such a short amount of
How
time.
do you tell that they're responding to you, and how do you tell in such a young child that healing is taking place?
I think that really speaks to how important a group is. In an individual setting, it might have looked very different. But in a group setting, right, when there were different children of different ages with different needs, all with their own personalities, you could really see the empathy building between them. If someone got hurt, for example, someone went and consoled them and stroked their back, and that was such a powerful moment to see from a child who was 3.5 to 4 years old, for example. Sharing of toys, taking turns, and
It shows compassion.
it really does.
Selflessness
Yeah.
at a very young age,
Yeah.
when they don't really know what those words actually mean.
Yeah. And how they responded to the adults as well, how they responded to us as strangers. The warmth that kept building throughout with each session. It was really, really powerful to see how the arts and play contributed to that.
So is expressive arts therapy something that you would recommend to anybody, even people who are opposed to like normal talk therapy?
Absolutely. And one thing about expressive arts therapy is that it meets you where you are.
Okay.
So if you are at a stage where you are resistant, you can just draw a circle and just shade. And like I talked about, you can just scribble. Like if you don't want to touch a crayon, or if you don't want to draw, you can just listen to the music. You don't have to do anything. You can just, the music that's playing in the room, you can listen to it, and it will definitely affect you in some way internally. There are some internal mechanisms that are responding to it.
Is the music something that's very carefully curated to make sure that something changes, even if the patient is not willing to talk, even if the client is not willing to speak?
There are no rules in place. We mostly go with how our intuition feels in that moment. For example, if I'm feeling that there's a lot of restlessness, I would probably play a track that is more soothing.
So this is based on the clinician's
Judgment.
Judgment.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's the right word. Very interesting. Anything else you want to add? I have another question otherwise.
No, go ahead.
I would like to ask you that this is not limited to obviously victims of domestic violence, but just in general, like let's say our parents, generation, can be very resistant to change. They can be very resistant to मतलब therapy जाना तो is a very दूर की बात, but even getting them to sort of accept the fact that you are going to therapy or that they are caregivers to you, and how they respond to you matters, can be a very hard task.
Yeah.
So what are some of the ways that we can sort of facilitate that change with our caregivers? Like, how can we sort of tell them to support people who are struggling better? Like, let's say I'm struggling. How do I communicate it to my parents that I need their support? Because just having an honest conversation does not work. Let me tell you.
It can never be a single conversation.
It never.
Me being a mental health professional, I've been practicing and studying.
Sure.
My parents know what I do, and they're like, okay,
Great. Good
go
for
ahead.
you.
Yeah. But when I had to talk to them about my own struggles with mental health, it
Sure.
took them years. They were supportive,
Sure.
but it took them years to really understand what exactly is happening. It scared them most of the time. But when I kept explaining to them ki I get it, it's scary for you, but I need your support in this moment. It took years.
I feel like, the problem here that I, at least, again, subjective, but their fear, obviously any parent who loves their child, which is pretty much every parent on the planet, is going to be scared when they hear that their child is suffering in any way, right? But that fear manifests in it looks very different for different sets of parents.
And in Indian parents,
it's almost always anger.
Yeah.
Anger. They're angry at you for not being normal or not being well, or they are angry at themselves. A lot of parents start internalizing that struggle, wherein they think that they failed somewhere as, caregivers, so that's why you've turned out like this.
Yeah. It's a very quick reaction to go there.
Yeah.
And I think it stems from a fear of the unknown.
Sure.
You can't figure these things out because it's so subjective. Maybe they've never been through something like this.
Even if they have, I feel like that acceptance for themselves though is impossible to reach, and an unimaginable amount of effort for them to even accept that is the case for a lot of the parents. Not everyone, but a lot. I feel like this is a larger conversation to be had.
It absolutely is. And it can't really be done in this isolated setup of you and your parents.
Yeah.
I think it needs to be done on a larger scale.
What does that look like? That's a very interesting perspective.
I think community awareness, and there are a lot of ways that we can bridge the gap. Maybe they won't listen to people who we listen to, but there are people who they listen to,
that they respect.
Yes. And to bridge those conversations, sometimes the people that they are influenced by, the ideologies they're influenced by, and the ideologies that we are influenced by, most of the time saying the same things in different ways. There are some basic things that they cover, like respect and compassion and non-violence, for example. These kind of ideas are common, but said in such different ways in different generations.
Yeah,
say,
correct.
It creates that gap. I won't listen to all these
nonsense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really do think what you said makes a lot of difference. That when it comes from somebody that they respect and they sort of want to, that they look up to in some manner, it then sort of starts making a difference. But it is a very big conversation to be had.
And it's a lot for one person to keep doing it and keep doing
Especially if you're the one who's suffering.
Exactly.
That not only are you suffering, and not only are you going through what you're going through, on top of that you're having to deal with this struggle of explaining to the people who probably matter the most to you, and dealing with their lack of understanding of it, or their refusal to accept, or their inability to help you. It can look like a lot of different things.
It can feel very debilitating to feel that unheard.
Yeah, the word that you said, unheard. But that brings me to something that you had, I want to circle back to something that you said previously in the beginning of our conversation, which was that in relationships, in romantic relationships especially, there is this there is the onus of emotional burden falls on the woman. It's as if that if the man is providing financially, then the entire emotional burden is on the woman. What does that look like in modern relationships, and how can that be fixed, or sort of how can that be worked through so that it's not completely on one person?
I think there's so many sides to this. One side is I think men do need to attune a lot more to their emotional selves, and also understand the fact that okay, so being an emotional self is a lot of the time seen as feminine, and to understand that there are masculine and feminine aspects in each of us in different capacities.
Correct.
And to be able to tap into
Both.
is just adding to the different repertoires of roles that you can play.
That's so interesting.
And it's going to take time to really get this understanding in stride. And also tapping into their emotional health is something that men need to do more and more and more, and it's going to start it's an intergenerational process as well.
I do think, I think that's so important. Especially in Indian society, I think patriarchy is so deeply
Entrenched.
our society and our familial sort of upbringing. I'm quite lucky to sort of have been raised in a family that isn't patriarchal, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that my mom is a very independent woman. She's been working all her life, so I haven't seen that much patriarchy in my home, but I have seen it in, let's say extended family or relatives, and I do see it even today on a daily basis when I step out of my house.
It's embedded in the larger systems that we live and function in.
Definitely. So now that brings me to a very important and I feel relevant question, which is that what are certain things that men can do? What are certain steps that, or sort of just like a general framework for men to be more emotionally aware and to be more what is the word that you emotionally attuned, and to support their female counterparts better, and not only for them but for themselves. How can they be more optimal and more how can they tap more into their balance of feminine and masculine energies to show up as their higher self, as their best self rather?
Firstly, this barrier of shame. I can't feel this deeply. I can't feel all these ugly emotions. This barrier of shame first needs to be slowly taken down. And then when you get into touch with your emotions, get in touch with your body as well and how it responds to those emotions. Because what we feel in our body and corresponding it with what we feel in our mind is how it expresses itself. Because mind and body is very connected. And the more you suppress it, which men tend to do, the more it comes out in dysfunctional ways.
I think this is a very important thing that people don't realize. We'll get to it then.
Yeah. So suppression is what causes it to somewhere. It needs to release somewhere. So once that barrier of shame is taken down and once those emotions are acknowledged and identified, then we can slowly start working on understanding them and where they come from and what they're asking of you. Anger, for example, is asking something of you and it's protecting you from something.
Sure.
And to really sit down and have a conversation with your anger or your sadness or your frustration and your grief is extremely important. And I know that I'm answering your question in context of men, but I think this is
just generally applicable as well. Yeah, definitely. Wow, that's so important. And just just as a parting note, I think we've covered a lot here, and a lot of these are larger conversations to be had, I feel.
Absolutely.
But we've touched upon some very, very important conversations, and I hope that our, listeners can sort of take away something, important. So if you had to leave me with just one thing, it can be anything, one core value that you live your life by, or one thing that you would want everyone in this world to practice. It can be anything, a thought that you would want people to think about. What would it be?
Even though I've said this throughout our conversation, trusting your instincts.
Yeah.
And also finding your artistic self. And maybe bridging the both of them.
Interesting.
So for me, that art is cooking.
Okay.
And it can be so rich. I'm giving my example.
Sure.
So it can be so rich sensorily, symbolically. It's so it can also be a very visceral experience to have that aroma and to feel that, oh, you can do things right. That, and then eating it, and then there's no preservation of that. So it's a circular thing. It's a thing. It really reminds us that we're cells in the body of the earth. So when you bridge, this is my opinion, that when you bridge your intuition and your artistic self, which is there in everyone, you just need to tap into it and to find out who that person is. You really are tapping into the energy of the universe.
Wow.
So this is something that I believe.
That's beautiful, and again, a very large conversation to be had.
Yeah.
And hopefully, maybe we meet again and have this conversation and delve deeper into the, many topics that we've touched upon.
Absolutely.
But I do think there are some very important key points in this conversation that our viewers can sort of take back and directly apply into their life. So thank you, Mayura, for taking the time. I think this was such an important and very, very enlightening conversation for me also. And arts therapy and expressive arts therapy is something I would want to consider, and I intend to sort of take up in my life. But thank you for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge, and I hope that we've helped somebody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Not at all. Thank you.